Hello, trumpet players. Today, I want to do a brief follow-up on the subject of body tension. We did a video about body tension. You can click here and go to that. We did a video about how to be completely focused. And now, this is a short follow-up about having a message. I mentioned this video in the second video about having a message, a musical message that you're going to share with the audience. If you saw the video, you'll know that I consider body tension to be more of a mental issue, not a physical issue. So it makes sense that having a message would play some sort of role in the process of getting rid of body tension. When we have conflicting signals from our brain to our muscles, it creates conflicting muscle groups tensing, flexing against each other. That's what body tension is. When we have a unified message that we're trying to communicate, it goes a long way towards unifying the signals that our brain sends to our muscles. And that's extremely important. When we go to a performance and have a message, it's not just body tension for that matter. When we go and have a message, you actually now create a reason for someone to hear you. I mean, imagine this, right? Hey, everybody, come out and hear me play. I'm going to play some really hard stuff. Does that touch people? No, that doesn't touch anybody. Who's impressed? Nobody's impressed. Nobody cares how hard the music is that you're playing. But when you go to the performance with a message, something happens. Okay? Um, and so that's the one important part of it, is now you're part of a bigger picture. You're part of this process of communicating back and forth, and it is a back and forth thing. We don't have time to go into that right now, but it is a back and forth thing. The audience is communicating back to you. But when you have this message, not only does it give people a reason to come hear you play, but it also unifies your thoughts so that everything that you're doing has a purpose. And that, like I said, it goes a long, long way towards removing the opposing muscle groups from the picture. Okay? It works, the way this works, the way that a message helps you with getting rid of body tension, it's very much similar to driving a car. When we drive, are we thinking about the steering wheel? Are we thinking about the gas or the clutch? All of that's supposed to be automatic. What are we supposed to be thinking about? We're supposed to be paying attention to the road. All that automatic stuff, we just trust that it's going to be there, and it is, because that's how our brains work. And we pay attention to getting where we have to go without creating any trouble, without getting into any trouble, wrecks or whatever, right? And the same thing is true with so many things. Throwing a ball. You don't think about what your hand is doing when you throw a ball. You look at where you want the ball to go and you throw it. And there's a lot of stuff in life that's like that. Trumpet is one of them. So basically, what I'm saying now is that one of the ways to get rid of body tension is to have that focus. And that focus, what we want to do is put that focus on a message so that we are sharing something valuable with the audience. Okay? Now, I believe that messages that we think, because remember, well, for most of us, the message that we have isn't going to be communicated through words. But something happens. That message does get communicated. It's almost miraculous. It's inexplicable, right? We don't know how it works, but it works. You can be thinking something. Now, I'm not going to say I'm thinking the color red and they're going to hear the color red. I'm not talking about that, okay? But in terms of mood, in terms of um, emotional uh, combinations, right? So we have, sometimes we have combinations of emotions, right? We have just a pinch of sadness and a great deal of anticipation, right? And so when we have those different combinations of feelings, and I'm saying that, we're communicating a message, but that message embodies all of this that I'm talking about. Okay. Anyway, so the process is inexplicable. I don't think we understand. I think what happens is that the human brain has learned how to pick up on so many subtle hints, hints that are so subtle that we can't pinpoint them, and not even scientifically. Hints that are so subtle that when we present our message with our thoughts through the music, those hints are communicated, and I believe that the audience picks those up and they might put their own words into the story, but they're going to hear your message. Now, let's talk about your message. You know, there are some people out there who are hurt. They hate everybody. And the way I feel about that is, if that's you, that should be your message. If you can't get over that, if you've been hurt and you can't get over that, then that is your message. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm not kidding. I'm I actually mean exactly what I say. If you are hurt, angry, and hateful, I actually believe that should be your message. And along those lines, I believe in practicing musical honesty. If I'm a hurt, damaged soul, my music needs to communicate that to the people. Now, here's the exception to what I'm saying, because I do believe that people who dwell on negative stuff, I think it eats their soul, and I also believe that it eats their bodies, for that matter, right? There's scientific evidence now coming, in the last 10, 15 years, saying that negative emotions have physical effects on our bodies. All right? So even though I believe in musical honesty, and if you can't get over the anger and the hatred, and I believe that that's what your music should be, I also believe that it would be better for you if you got over it, right? Now, I'm only speaking about music. This is how I do my lessons, right? I do not pry into my students' private lives. That is a line that I draw. The only time we get even close to talking about my students' private lives outside of the music is when it has a direct bearing on their music, right? So for example, I normally wouldn't ask a student, what did you eat? But if I feel like something in the lesson is telling me they didn't eat right, like I've had students that hadn't eaten in over 24 hours, well, of course the lesson's not going to go well. And that's the only time I'll cross that line, is if it has a direct relationship to the music. But even then, I stay out of the details. I don't want to know the details, right? And in the same way with this stuff, I don't need to know why you're hurt or who hurt you. Don't tell me that stuff. That's a line that I draw in the lessons, okay? But we will talk about the negativity. We will talk about how it will eat your life up, and how finding good things to be focusing on in your life is better for you and better for your music, right? So it's a tricky for my policies, how I have them set up. And I know a lot of people, they're the opposite. Your private lesson teachers, actually heard people say this. Um, Private lesson teachers, right? They say that they're the students' counselors. I think that's extremely irresponsible behavior on the part of a teacher. Your teacher is not your counselor. If you need a counselor, go get a counselor. And that's not, now the funny thing is, and I know I'm on a tangent here, sorry about that. The funny thing is that a lot of students through the trumpet learn life skills and life lessons. I just had a student this week tell me that he's doing so well in university because of our lessons. I never crossed the line with him. The only time we talked about personal stuff was when it had something directly connected to the music, right? And yet he learned so much through the lessons that he's now an academic success at in his first year at the university. He's kicking butt, right? So it's ironic, right? I don't want to be your counselor, but a lot of trumpet students are getting from me stuff that's probably more valuable than going to a counselor. But I do not cross that line. Anyway, so your message in this context, remember we're talking about a message, right? Your message in this context needs to be honest and true to who you are, but you should also at the same time be striving to be somebody that's good and healthy for you and good and healthy for your society that you live in. So take that to heart. Um, Now, a lot of you, and this is common with today's society, a lot of you might take this as an excuse to sit and wait and not move on what you're learning right now because you don't know what your message is yet. And this is the same thing you'll hear people say today. Yes, I'm waiting to find who I am before I get a job or before I move on with my life. And over and over and over again, it's been proven that if you wait to find out who you are first, you're going to have a bad life. You'll never find out who you are, because the way you find out who you are is go work, go to school. It's rubbing up against the world that's how you find out who you are. Sitting in your room playing video games is not going to help you find out who you are. Okay? But in the same sense, waiting until you have a message is not going to help your trumpet playing. So I want to encourage you that if you can't think to yourself, well, what is my message? Then I want you to pick a message, and for 1 month, practice expressing that message through your music. It can be any arbitrary message. Um, you can say, I love animals, right? If you're an animal lover, that could be your message. I love animals. Um, if you are concerned about world events, make that your message. The concern you have about whether it be politics or um, you know um, more global environmental stuff, make that your message. Until you find something more personal to you, you should experiment with different messages with your music now. And I'd say, give it a month. And if that doesn't resonate with you, try something else and give that a month. Something I didn't mention earlier. This may sound very weird to someone who just plays trumpet in band, right? How is your message going to affect what's happening in the audience? Well, it does. Your message is part of a collective, and it does contribute to the band as a whole. So don't think that doesn't count. That what I'm saying doesn't apply to band students while they're playing in band. Your message can now. It's not as clear to the audience that you have a message, right? But collectively, everybody playing together, that message is communicated that way, right? And same thing with competitions, right? We think um, in a competition, why should there be a message? But that's probably when it's most important to have a message, right? Because nobody wants to hear how good you are. Nobody wants that. They may say they want it, but really what people want is to hear what you have to say through your music. So yeah, even in competitions and in band and different contexts like that, this still holds true. Now, moving on, I want to talk about my message quickly, just to give you an example. I'm not telling you this for any other reason other than to give you an example of what a message can be like. My message, I knew my message as early as seventh grade. Um, I started praying in seventh grade that God's love would shine through my music. That's seventh grade. So when I perform, my message is that God loves you. Okay? It's a simple message, and sometimes it's more complex because the music I'm playing, I sometimes perform ugly music as part of my job, right? But when I bring my message to that ensemble, I think I contribute something that will kind of add something a little bit more wholesome to the ugliness. We're going to talk more about ugliness in a couple minutes here. To give you an example of how my message has manifested, this is just one example out of my whole career. It's happened many, many times, but this is, I think, the most perfect example for what we're talking about. I was playing a recording session. It was my first jazz recording session when I came to Houston. It was a fusion, we would call today smooth jazz recording, but I had some improvised solos on it. The album is not available anymore. I wish it was. It was actually just a cassette tape. Um, but when I was getting paid, the producer making out the check, and he said to me, I like your playing. He says, your music, talking about my improvisation, he says, your music is modern, but it doesn't repulse me. That's somebody who gets it. He gets it. That was my message. How did he? I never told the guy, we never had any conversation before that. And here he was summing up in perfect words what my message has been since 7th grade. He said, um, your music is modern, but it does not repulse me. So your message does get communicated. Believe me, it does get communicated. Now, one more thing about my message. I started in I guess it was about 20 years ago. I read The Communist Goals in America, and yes, I know that that's kind of controversial, and I'm not trying to get political here, okay? It doesn't matter to me the controversy surrounding that. What matters to me is that somewhere somebody said, hey, this would be bad for society. This list of items would be bad for society. Whether it was the communists who wrote it or the people trying to frame the communists, doesn't matter. These things are supposed to be bad for society. And one of the items on the list was promote ugliness as art. And when I read that, I thought to myself, wow, you know, that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want my music. Now, I don't think my music was ever ugly. But that's actually happening in the world today. And I know I said earlier that if that's who you are, then that's what it needs to be. But I have a suspicion that some people who promote ugliness as art are doing it superficially, and it's not who they are. They're actually good people, happy people. But there's sort of like, the thing is, ugliness sells. In our society today, ugliness sells. And I'm actually one of the people standing up and saying, enough is enough. I'm not going to have it. Right? So that's my message. I'm not going to go with the ugliness thing. I refuse to do that. So do you see how my message works? And like I said earlier, I'm only sharing this with you because I want you to have an idea of how the message thing works, an example of what a message could be. Your message doesn't have to be religious. However, I will say this though. Sometimes when you find your message, it's a religious experience. I'll leave it at that. Maybe I should say spiritual experience. But yes, when you finally find your message, I've seen this happen many times over. It's sort of like finding who you are. Now, like I said, it's not something that happens right away, and you can't wait to move forward until it does happen. That's not the way to do it. But it is a very important part of your spiritual growth, really. And that's as far as I'll go with that because that's not what I'm here for, right? We're only talking about trumpet, and that's the line that I draw. It is a spiritual thing. That's as far as I'll go with that. Now, I have one thing left to say. I realized when I was putting this together that I said in a previous video that we want to be mindless when we play. And I want to clarify how we can be mindless and totally focused. How can we be mindless when we perform? And you can click here to go to the mindless, where I talk about practicing mindlessly and performing mindlessly. You can click here and that'll take you to that. But doesn't that sound like a contradiction? We want to be completely focused. We want to be completely mindless. Those sound like opposites. But we are multi-part beings. And we're talking about two different parts of who we are. Okay? Remember when we were talking about driving the car? We want to be mindless when we drive a car or throw a ball. We don't want to be totally focused on the muscles that we use to throw a ball or drive a car. And in the same sense, when I'm talking about the mindless stuff, in the same sense, we don't want to be totally focused on the muscles and on the notes and on the technical stuff while we're playing. That should all be automatic, coming from our subconscious minds, right? So that's how we clarify that contradiction. When we're totally focused, what we're totally focused on, you know, horses, when they have those blinders, we always use the word focus as concentrating really hard on that one thing. That's really not how focus works. Focus means you're not paying attention to this, and you're not paying attention to that. You're only paying attention to that. And I never once said that you shouldn't be thinking about anything when you perform, right? It's just what we think higher thoughts in our performances. That's where we want to get. We want to think, hey, let's make this part of the music more joyful. That's an upper level thought. And that's what we're focusing on. Okay? So that's the contradiction. It's not a contradiction. Okay? All right. So that's what I got for you. The message is extremely important to get rid of body tension. It's also important, of course, for why are we playing the horn at all, right? But yes, this is very important for body tension. And if you have any questions about that, please ask below. Other than that, God bless you, and we will see you on the next video.